Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 741. The ancient war commences. Pained groans of an ancient and benevolent voice rumbled in what Avril could feel to be despair. Dark clouds emerged out of the void and spread to shroud the stars, choking out the last semblance of light. Only one spot remained bright, the place where the carolan first broke through and descended. Inside it, Ein weaved and intertwined into grids like a cage, keeping something out as they endured a fierce beating that caused them to fluctuate and dim. Their light was fading, but they clung on despite how they became as thin as the finest threads, unbreakable for the time being. Her advancement was easier than expected. The convergence truly was a miracle beyond compare that allowed such easy advancement into the King Exalt realm. Avril breathed out and touched the crown floating above her head, a circlet of flowing Ein with a single spoke sticking out, feeling the groove that was missing a jewel. At times like this, a wave of relief should have washed over her, but only fear filled her thoughts at the sight of the 10 carolan, including Gilbert, completing their advancements. Their eyes radiated oppression and left her feeling helpless as they drifted below and back to one another. The lingering will of this world is mighty indeed. Though, I suppose the place that gave birth to our blood would be quite unique. The scholarly man, Artera, adjusted his glasses and gazed at the tear in the stormy sky. A fierce power battered on the interlocking Ein that prevented whatever lay ahead from entering, but the loud bashings were worrisome to hear. Artera flipped open his pocket watch and shut it, clicking his tongue in clear annoyance. Vanus, a sir, and Alvarez stand guard. Guard for what? We should kill the others here. Alvarez insisted, stepping out to the edge. Why waste our time? The convergence has ended, and we must collect the prisoner we have below before this realm expels us into Talos. Alvarez seemed uncaring that everyone here could hear this conversation as if their existence didn't matter to him. I have an idea to weaken the barrier for a small fraction of the moment and allow at least a few more of us through. Not the original 15 we hoped for, but perhaps 2 or 3 more. What worth are they if they can't act on Talos without having gone through the convergence? A blue-robed woman who had been silent earlier spoke up, shaking her head. It's not that I doubt you, Artera, but I can't imagine any use for them from this point onward other than that. Isn't that right, Charisse? At least we don't have to do the filthy duty of bearing children with the ilk here like Evelyn and Cassandra. Avril knew from the tone that she was mocking the other woman named Charisse, much in the same manner her former mistress used to. However, Charisse shrugged with a cheeky smirk and said, "Who knows? Be wary of needless slander, Frere. You may end up with the same fate." Ah. Frere raised a brow and stepped out toward Charisse, but was blocked by Artera's hand. Enough prattling. You're making a fool of yourselves and, by extension, our family. We're wasting time, precious time. After scolding them, Artera waved Gilbert over. Don't mind Frere. You and your mother are the same as us. Only the immature like them believe in divisions. Step in the middle and use your blood. The 3 of you stand guard. No one should be able to break through our barriers, but I prefer some peace while we work. Artera, Frere, and Charisse, the grade 9s, sat around Gilbert and held out their necklaces, 7-pointed stars that shone just as bright between their palms. Avril recalled a similar necklace in Oscar's possessions and grimaced, staring down in anticipation, waiting for her husband to arrive. Surely, he was still alive. The remaining 3 carolan, the grade 8s, encircled the group and also pointed out their necklaces. Light beamed and bounced to each necklace, connecting them, and Orin exclaimed, screaming about how they formed a formation so quickly. So says the boss. Vanus, a sir. You 2 stop anyone from approaching. If anyone can get past you 2, leave them to me. The 3 designated as the guards by Artera patrolled the formation. Alvarez laughed, glancing over the crowd. Though, would anyone here be a good challenge? However, some are quite beautiful. I can't wait to taste the luxuries of this world, despite how few there would be. Scum. That whole family is scum. Celestina murmured from the side, gripping her rapier to the point it shook from her anger. She didn't step up to challenge the insults, and for good reason. Alvarez was a grade 9 and far surpassed anyone here. Avril grabbed Celestina's wrist and gave a short nod, calming her friend down. Suddenly, her heart ached as if struck by a hammer, and she gasped, clutching her chest, coughing out blood. Celestina knelt and looked worried. "What's wrong, Avril? I made a huge mistake." Avril coughed between words and saw the splotches of blood on her palm. Honestly, she should have seen it coming but ignored it the whole time. Not even the advancement to the King Exalt fixed the consequences of overdrawing the wreath when she had gone beyond its limits. To be fair, staying alive afterward was a stroke of luck. At that moment against her former mistress, she had exerted too much and knew it might end in her death, and Oscar realized it too through their resonance. But it warmed her heart to know he hadn't stopped her at the time and didn't let down her resolve. "Hurry up, you idiot." A burst of iron shuddered the world and struck against the barrier, failing to hit any of the carolan inside. Alvarez perked up and rose to his feet, facing the one who had dealt that blow. Lysander crossed his arms and tilted his head with a wide smile. In a hearty burst of laughter that rippled across the air, the shattered scion summoned his King Exalt's crown and pointed at Alvarez. "Hey, blue hair, why not bring down the entire net over Talos? Do that, and I will leave without a word. Watch your tone, you lowly cur. You may have the highest of grades, but your blood is not. Only a fool will face me without an ancestral mark." Alvarez sneered. "Are you a fool or a man seeking death in battle? Either way, I can grant you death. Would you say those words to your ancestors who lacked the ancestral mark before they rose? If anyone is a fool, it's you who relies on the leftovers they give you, like a dog waiting at the foot of a table." Lysander's smile flattened, and his yellow eyes gleamed fiercely. "If you take so much pride in the legendary blood flowing in you, then fear the ones who will rise and begin their own." The shattered scion clenched his hands and took a stance, kicking off the air and swinging right at Alvarez, who reached out and extended a staff out of nowhere, blocking the diamond fist. The single exchange nearly knocked Avril off her feet, but her firm roots held her and her children in place. Lysander opened his fist and grabbed the staff, clutching it in his firm grip. He tensed his other arm and sent another punch, throbbing with intense gravitational force. Alvarez laughed and broke his staff in two, slipping them out of Lysander's hold. The two halves crossed and blocked the other fist, resisting the gravity with a repulsion of his own. They weren't using any spells at all, simply the pure innate power of their armaments and anima. That was understandable, considering they hadn't learned any grade 5 spells in the short time after advancing. Avril noted that Alvarez also had the elemental spark of earth, matching Lysander blow for blow. The two rods in Alvarez's hands split again and extended out, linked by chains. He whipped them around, their swings and paths faster than her eyes could catch them as they moved more widely than a storm over the ocean. A lot happened at once, dozens of blows meeting one another with deadly force. Vanus, a sir, led Gilbert's forces and killed the rest. "No one should be a match for you two." Alvarez laughed, seemingly enjoying the fight. Somehow, Lysander was keeping up with the erratic movements. Vanus and Assur, who were twins, judging by their identical appearance, cracked their necks and neared the edge. Just as they were about to go down, a section of the floor was flung up and shredded into sparks at the barrier at the top, and smoke plumed up. Avril widened her eyes and forgot to breathe at the figure hidden inside. Everyone around her jolted as if struck by fear and awe. She knew, as everyone else seemed to know, that whoever had arrived was strong and was beyond anything they had ever felt, a strange ein. Yet she found it somehow familiar. The smoke dissipated, and Oscar emerged. Avril smiled and shed tears, glad to see him well and alive. But what was that new form? Her husband's hair had become pure white, reminding her of Erden's fur. Still, she could never mistake those beautiful obsidian eyes that gleamed with the same wondrous light of the man she met long ago in the withered forest before they traveled in the burning valley, before the tragedies that had stricken him. It was the look of confidence and deep kindness that shone with determination. Two antlers extended from his forehead, one rainbow and wreathed in colorful flames, the other pure black like his eyes. Oscar sighed and took a step forward, reaching Vanus and Assur, their expressions warped by shock as they turned toward him. Avril chuckled in disbelief at their bodies being flung away and slammed into the barrier. Enough. This war is over. Oscar spoke in a voice that quelled the rumbling storm above and cleared the skies back into the starry expanse. The fierce attacks on the barrier in the gap stopped, and she could hear audible gasps resounding behind it. And behind Oscar, she thought her eyes had been fooling her, but she saw faint visages of a being of pure flame and a guardian of pure steel. What had happened down there? Oscar landed on the disc and stared at the carolan inside. I have come to end it. Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 742. The New Form, an Unlikely Ally. The faint breeze under the dancing stars eased Oscar as he glanced around. Rather than the gaudy halls and the desolate pit, he preferred the freedom outside and admired the great view of the blue horizon meeting the descending night. Avril and the others were all right and uninjured. It was relieving to see. Jokingly, he wondered what would happen if he escaped right now with Avril and the others. But no, he had a job to finish, a last request he could not deny, and strode forward, eyeing the carolan twins staggering to their feet. He hadn't expected his strength to have become this powerful. A mere flick of his hands had blown them away without any resistance. Touching the antlers on his head, Oscar traced his finger along the smooth, black metal, identifying it as the primordial metal of legends, and held the blazing fire soothing to the touch and filling him with warmth. He sensed Erden's presence inside him, still wide awake and alert in the back of his mind alongside Demon. Receiving the Ancient's powers did more than elevate his own strength. It somehow completed his integration. Few people had ever achieved blood transmutation with a beast, and only one in the past possessed the perfect Reese body. And only he had both in all of history. For years, he trained and pondered his integration. The anima was more than willing to try to integrate into him, but he fell short of success every time. The frustrating mystery's solution eluded him, and he only just found the answer on his way here. The blood transmutation simplified the meld for his anima to fuse with Erden, but shared the properties of the Prialapos into his perfect Reese body, creating a mismatch between him and his anima. He realized it after the Ancients vanished and left him and Erden their powers. The answer was simple and out of the ordinary, just like everything in his long life. With the Ancients' powers, they had evolved, Erden becoming one with flame, and he with metal, yet holding to their mortal forms. Once he melded his anima into Erden, he felt a strange and strong tug that lulled him closer, and Erden, driven by instinct, charged and became a pure flame, entering his chest. His friend in the meld, now transformed into the avatar of an ancient, had become the matching anima required for his integration, resulting in his current form. Oscar didn't like the white hair that came from Erden. At least his eyes still shone a lustrous black, the ones that Avril complimented the most. He tried to retrieve his shield from the dimensional cube, but the armament refused and almost seemed to plead, shaking violently in his grip. One swing might undo its existence. Feeling pity, Oscar let it go and focused his attention on assessing the situation, drifting his sight past Lysander and the Grade 9 carolan and settling on the shimmering azure barrier holding several more undergoing a strange ritual. The carolan twins pulled themselves off the barrier, landing with a loud thud and cracking their backs, and walked up to him, silent and steady in their strides, showing no signs of fear or cowardice despite his earlier show of force. From outside came no sounds as everyone became silent like an audience waiting with bated breath for the climax of a duel. One pounded his pair of gauntlets in a thunderous clang, followed by the sound of the knuckles grinding and spewing sparks. The other was a master, swinging his chain and sickle to the point not even the wind made a sound. They already had Grade 5 armaments crafted beforehand. Oscar was annoyed that Maturs didn't allow him the same grace to bring in a Grade 5 armament, but saw no use in complaining now, not after all they had done. The chaotic whine and rumblings of Lysander's battle raged on above. Oscar raised his finger and scratched his bare chin, having shaved it off due to his renewed youthful appearance. The enemy was certainly strong and deadlier than anyone other than the Grade 9s. Ancestral marks shone fiercely on their foreheads. Yet, strangely, Oscar felt no fear, as if the slashing sickle and clenched gauntlet approaching carried no threat. The gauntlet carolan used his integration, his joints becoming orbs of wind and storm, allowing his limbs to bend unnaturally. The sickle carolan transformed into a strange, hooded figure, chains dandling like a veil to cover his face. The sickle slashed his neck, letting out jets of high-pressure water that could slice through metal. A fierce gust comparable to the might of a hurricane imploded on his chest where the gauntlet struck and pressed on his ribcage, exerting enough force to eviscerate a person's innards. Their combined efforts failed to make him feel pain. Oscar glanced at the sickle resting by his neck and at the gauntlet stuck on the skin of his chest. What is happening? This man is unharmed. The carolan's gauntlet trembled like the clattering of teeth. Faltering here is stupid. Keep striking. The other, named V, flicked his wrist, the sickle by Oscar whipping around and choking his neck. He opened his hood, revealing a head comprised of chains. His figure unraveled and swept forward in long, winding motions as if he were a den of snakes, the links rattling and dripping water. The chains of V coiled around Oscar, encasing him in an armor of chains, a prison shaped for a human. Each droplet that streaked down his skin from the chains held a sharpness akin to the spikes of an iron maiden, the closest thing he could describe this to be. There was no doubt that this man, V, had a nasty personality to have such an integration. The other, A, spun his arms in unnatural angles, spinning once, then twice, a third until it blurred, violent winds swirling by the intensifying rotational forces of his fists. It was as if his arms had become drills. The howling of the tumultuous wings was accompanied by A's roar. The carolan punched, unleashing the storm, and by doing so, pressed the chain on Oscar's body, sending out a slicing jet of water. A barrage of blows engulfed Oscar, water and wind battering his water, exploding and slicing everywhere. Vanis! Sir, get out of there! A carolan shouted from inside the barrier, his glasses dropping, but he didn't seem to notice. At least he had the courtesy to shout their names. Though, his warning came too late. A painful wail came from the chains that writhed and struggled to maintain their hold on him. Scorch marks adorned every link, and smoke and vapors fumed off the charred steel. Oscar spread his arms, breaking free, and grasped a handful of chains that wriggled in his grip. His integration neither granted him armor nor a flaming form, but kept to the core values of the Prialapos, containing the Ein and power as a supplement to the body. Attacks either melted before reaching him or failed to pierce his steely skin. No mercy, Oscar declared, driving a fist forward at the bundle of chains. Black metal clad his fist, and rainbow flames blazed on its surface in perfect fusion. A single shattering wave ground many of the chains into fine dust and continued forth in a direct path of destruction, striking the barrier that heaved and bent but managed to deflect his blow. The carolan, whom he now knew as Vanis, appeared out of the dust, nearly every bone broken and twisted in unsettling ways as blood coated his broken skin. Not sparing him another glance, Oscar turned to the other carolan, Assur, and grabbed one forearm, pulling it off with ease. Assur screamed and stretched out his maimed arm, the wind orb sticking out on the end, and somehow recalled the severed forearm back, reattaching it. Oscar sighed and raised his arm, mimicking the point and edge of a sword. Slash after slash, he severed the limbs at the joints, attacking the wind orbs that kept them together. Assur struggled and tried to retreat, but Oscar grabbed his head and aimed for the one place he surely couldn't restore, slicing his neck that hadn't been transformed into a wind orb. The carolan shivered with a bloodshot glare and looked down at the rest of his body. He opened his mouth to speak, and Oscar denied him, ramming a fist to squash his head into a pulp. Shaking off the blood and brain matter, he saw the rest of Assur's body lose its integration, and blood gushed out of the severed limbs, lacking the wind orbs and their strange ability. He found it almost comical that the prided Grade 8 with ancestral marks, comparable to the divine enforcers like Cell, were like weak children before him. Perhaps, now, only a Grade 9 might pose an adequate challenge. Above, the other two stopped their battle and gazed at him as he walked ahead, reaching the barrier. His fist distorted the barrier, yet could not pierce through. What a tricky barrier, and judging from the rising Ein in the center, he had no time to call an Orin to decode and break it. "Excuse me, scary man. What is that certain familiar feeling? Do you have Aunt Evelyn's necklace?" A sonorous voice mixed with a hint of joy and mischief echoed in his mind. "Ah, just think of my voice and reply. I can hear it. I am the heir of Isaac, who was the husband of Evelyn." Oscar didn't stop attacking the barrier while talking, bashing fist after fist onto it. "I thought so. Phew. I was worried that this world might not have a defender." "Then, is Uncle Isaac?" Worry-laden in her tone. "He's dead," Oscar replied. "I see. That's unfortunate." Aunt Evelyn held on to the hope that she might still see him. The woman lowered her voice, sniffling. I'm Charisse. Nice to meet you, well defender of Talos. Now, let's undo this barrier. I can't do it myself, but if you use Aunt Evelyn's necklace, it can work." "Why should I trust you?" Oscar asked. "Because I want them to lose." Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 743. Overwhelming Might of the Ancients. The single statement gave Oscar pause as he glanced past the shimmering barrier and honed in on the woman who had spoken. Her blue hair shimmered like an ocean under the sun and was tied into 6 tails held by golden rings. Half of her beautiful face was warped, twitching in disgust with bitten lips, and the other kept a serene smile. She somehow noticed his gaze and peeked at him with her azure eyes, sparkling like sapphires. While he despised their arrogance, he couldn't dismiss the inherent beauty all carolan possessed and the grade 9 Exaltia he felt within 3 of them, including Charisse. "Agree or not? Disagree, and the rest of my wayward kind will descend," Charisse declared. She glanced up and urged him. "Hurry up. I'm secretly delaying for as long as I can, but it will complete." "Why are you betraying your people?" "I can't understand," Oscar asked but thought better of it. Betrayal was the one sin he could never forgive, even if it benefited him against the enemy. That was why he despised Sarat's methods, which were quite similar to how Saul had misled and betrayed him. However, now was not the time for his personal beliefs. He took a deep breath and refocused on the barrier blocking his way. "Never mind. I'll know after this is over. For now, I'll go along with your rebellion." Sensing a hostile presence, Oscar spun and looked back, expecting the bloodied corpses of the twins, but instead was stunned to see them alive and well. The twins stood on clean ground, as if the blood he had spilled from their bodies was a mere illusion. A strange azure mark on their chests resembled the outlines of a watch and ticked down, the hands all pointing up. The clocks dissipated apart into motes, and the twins wiped the sweat off their pointed chins, faces pale. Their watchful gazes fixated on him as they retreated a short distance, wandering around his body, presumably looking for a weakness. Was that a time spell? Oscar grew curious. He couldn't speak for all time users since he only knew the Pavilion Master, now the headmaster of Haven Academy, Remulus Grant, to be the sole wielder of the time element. But nowhere in any tomes of knowledge existed a time spell that rewound death itself. Or else, his own master might have been spared that unfortunate death. His alertness slightly rose as it seemed the carolan possessed unique spells that never existed in Talos. Still, he ignored the twins, unable to consider them a threat, and held out the 7-pointed star necklace. "Where did you get that?" The man who had been fighting Lysander bolted straight toward Oscar. He blinked out of sight and reappeared behind Oscar, looking shaken when Oscar turned to face him. None of the man's movements had escaped the grasp of his prinstinct, enhanced to the eyes of an ancient, capable of witnessing not just his, but everyone's in an area surrounding him. Most people would not have known how the man moved so quickly, but to Oscar, his means were bare and naked before him. He had to admit the use of gravity in boosting his speed to mimic spatial movements was impressive. Thanks to his enhanced prinstinct, he reached out the necklace and tapped it on the barrier, knowing the man behind him would not strike. Lysander charged down and forced the man to defend himself in a hasty, unstable position, a deadly mistake for anyone. Yet the man swerved and backed away, suffering only a few scrapes on his arms. Truly, The carolan possessed frightening might and ingenuity in battle. Oscar couldn't deny that. That raised the importance of stopping their plans to bring more. Any more might spell the end for Talos despite his powers since he remained only one man. All right. Nicely done. Charisse smirked and snapped her eyes wide open, pointing her necklace directly at his. Ein beamed from the center and linked to his necklace that now spun in place. He didn't know much about formations, but even an ignorant man could tell the symmetry of the formation had been broken due to this new link. Like a discord worming its way in a symphony of sounds, the entire delicate network of Ein distorted and snapped apart, one by one. Without hesitation, Charisse slammed her palm at the other woman beside her, easily blocked yet forcing a pained groan from the woman. Charisse used the free moment to leap up, flipping in the air and landing by his side. Thank you for the cooperation. Charisse beamed a wide smile and glanced at the sky. Oscar followed her gaze and noticed the gap in the sky closing as if repairing itself and stitching it back together. A low roar quaked the sky and dimmed the brightness of the stars, sounding resentful and enraged. Once the gap fully closed, the roaring ceased, clearly having originated from the outside. Charisse sniffled and wiped a tear off the corner of her eyes. "Why do you weep?" Oscar asked. Aunt Evelyn said if someone does come forward with her necklace and stops the family's plan, then she would certainly be punished, Charisse said somberly. I can't imagine what they'll do to her for betraying them twice. Curb your tears. That can wait until after we leave. I still expect to hear what you have to say. Oscar stepped forward. The other carolan rose and gathered, all 9, excluding Charisse, who just betrayed them. Some leaned forward, carrying hateful glares and itching for a fight, but one stayed calm, a carolan garbed in a fine blue uniform and spectacles of crystal glass. He weighed the options and wondered how far his new powers fared against 4 grade 9s with ancestral marks. Perhaps with Avril's integration and resonance acting as support and Lysander fighting off one, he could win. His wife somehow knew his thoughts and already reached him, hiding behind him. The way she always seemed to come at the right moments, whether to comfort him or support him, made him smile. Here was the epicenter, the deadliest place, where grade 9s gathered, yet she didn't hesitate to be here. Her integration forming a fine dress of long parchments of written word that reached her ankles and long, wide sleeves past her hands. The resonance linked them, their hearts beating as one and mind and memory melding together. He learned of the carolan's names and what transpired before his arrival. Did Talos risk everything to produce this warrior? The man, Alvarez, grinned the toothy smile of a berserker, clearly inclined to war and bloodshed. Incredible. I didn't expect a person of this caliber. Out of all the lowborns here, I recognize you as an equal. Be glad to have earned my respect. What arrogance. Oscar knew there was no point in talking with such a person and waited for their next move, grinding his feet on the floor, expecting an all-out assault from the carolan. But their leader, Artera, held out his hand, halting Alvarez from attacking, garnering a few confused looks, but spoke in a clear, concise voice. I thought it was a mistake due to the other variables. But did you meet the Ancient of Metal below? His presence is gone. Oscar didn't answer, and Artera resumed as if giving a lecture in a class. I can only assume you had somehow fused with the Ancient. That, combined with the powers of Reese. Not even the enemy, Voltan, was capable of it. I am not of Voltan's blood. I just happened to be the right man at the right time to take his place. Oscar said, Are you willing to risk everything in another war? Carolan and Ancients. If we start another war, then surely, Talos will fall regardless of the victor, who will enjoy a Pyrrhic victory before watching the world break apart. How about a deal? Artera glanced at the battle-hungry Alvarez, forcing the other to stay put. Evidently, there was a clear hierarchy. A deal? Oscar asked. Choose any number of people you wish. Once our duties are finished here, we can bring you all with us to a grander place beyond your imagination. I can swear an oath if that will placate any worries of us reneging on the deal. Carolan blood is too precious to be split in this lower world, and you must not want any harm to come to those close to you. War can be an unfortunate nexus of tragedies. For a brief moment, His eyes wandered to Avril behind him, not as a threat that could be perceived. Oscar knew Artera was reminding him to consider what was truly important. You have a way with words. But if your home is that much grander, then why come here? You came down here to commit a massacre and wish to avoid war? Oscar scoffed. What other response would be proper to such an act? Then we are at an impasse. I wish to settle it in a civil manner, but much like Voltin, you are unruly. Are you certain of starting another war? The last one destroyed half of Talos. Artera opened his pocket watch and shut it with an audible click. Wrong, Oscar stated. There is no new war. It had always been ongoing. I said it earlier. I have come to end it, once and for all. He pulled out Voltin's sword, Artera's eyes widening in response, and raised it high, light radiating off its edges as a mix of black and rainbow coated the blade. The blade hummed with a hint of displeasure, but relented to Oscar's will and allowed a single swing. Oscar swung once, and the carolan were engulfed in an ocean of rainbow flames under a downpour of black needles glinting sharply. The sheer force of his blade bashed against the barrier that prevented anyone from flying over the edge. The Ein stretched out several miles before the attack was finally contained. Oh, you survived, Oscar said, hearing a part of his antlers cracking. Forcibly using Voltin's sword when it required the gift of all the ancients and Voltin's bloodline used up quite a lot of his Ein. But the result was magnificent. Artera had one knee on the floor, holding up his scarlet hands, the skin torn off, with a winding barrier between them. Several other carolan had combined their barriers into his and barely survived with wounds covering their bodies. Still, two others, grade 8s, lay limply, lifeless on the floor before the clock marks appeared on their chests and spun the ticking hands, bringing them back. They coughed and gasped the first air of their second life. Another. Oscar raised Voltin's sword, ignored its cries, and readied for one more blow to end it. Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 744. The carolan prepare for war. Artera gritted his teeth and quieted the intrusive thoughts of defeat surfacing in his mind, bringing himself to a calm state. He clasped his palms and expanded a field of Ein, rewinding everyone's wounds away. The immensely powerful man clenched his sword and started to slash forward but halted, the sword clattering in his grip as blood spilled from his lips. It provided the necessary time Artera thought he lacked, but fortune smiled on him. The teleportation formation activated, swirling Ein around him and his brothers and sisters. He sighed in relief at his new surroundings, feeling the cold stone floor on his knees. Get up. We are here. Artera helped Alvarez up and took a second look over the ravine. Artera, that man was within our grasp. We only needed to kill him. Alvarez shouted, grasping his shoulder and clenching hard as if wishing to crush his bones. Artera sighed at the foolishness of his true younger brother and wondered how his esteemed father could have ever sired two absolutely opposite children. Perhaps the error lay in their mothers, though he couldn't know for certain since the mothers had passed away. His wayward little brother glared fiercely, demanding an answer, but Artera brushed him off with ease and regarded Alvarez's pained groan with little empathy. Turning the corner, he slowed his steps until coming to a halt before a large gate, streaks of azure flowing on its edges. While it is true we could have defeated that man, it would have come at a great cost that would have affected our goals. Remember that we are here for the world core. Focus on the mission, Alvarez, and perhaps our father will look upon you fondly. Artera didn't need to turn to know Alvarez was scowling, followed by a loud click of a tongue. Do not underestimate him. Same for the rest of you. Our overconfidence will be our undoing. And Charisse? That wench has betrayed us. That should never have happened. Her memories have returned, Frere said, rubbing her chest where Charisse had struck her earlier. She'll be a problem. Not that she wasn't from the start, but now they'll know our plan. Our sister's betrayal means nothing. Artera palmed the smooth surface of the gate, devoid of dust and nicks of time, pristine and clean as if built yesterday. His finger glowed with Ein and etched a symbol of a 7-pointed star, the gate trembling as the section with the mark pushed in and turned like a lock, clicking open. She may have some knowledge, but she does not know everything. We are fortunate to have encountered our enemy and survived. The reason Valten was able to match the carolan was because of the aid of all ancients at their height of power and the sword forged to wield that immense strength. But they're mostly gone now, or at least not active in Talos. And that sword is nowhere near the world splitter of legends. Gilbert added, "It pleases me to hear our newest brother have some sense. Yes, the sword refuses his will. That single slash was powerful, but drained a considerable amount of his ine. He will not use it again." The final gear turned inside the gate and ended with a loud thud. Artera pushed the doors wide open and led his fellow carolan down the grand halls flanked by large furnaces. Sparks spewed out of the ancient forges and ignited the hearths, glowing red-hot as the flames rose and fumed smoke. He has the powers of igniters and matures, but they are restrained to his flesh, lacking the otherworldly presence that graced our ancestors on the battlefield. Unlike Valten, he is still human, and that is a weakness we can exploit. Didn't seem like that while we fought, Vanis nudged Sir, who nodded in agreement. I saw nothing in his eyes, a distant gaze, not a human's. I never felt smaller in my life, even when facing you, Artera. Indeed, he is frightening. Whatever happened to him changed parts of his being, but his humanity is still in there. I noticed when that woman came up behind him. Artera opened his pocket watch, noting the time was almost here, and carried on at his leisurely pace. For that brief moment, he no longer seemed so frightening. That should be his partner. What is his name? Oscar Tur. He comes from the same place as me. A misguided fool who is unable to forget the past and move on. Speaking of useless memories and bonds, Gilbert frowned and unsheathed his broadsword. He ruined everything. If the chance arises, let me kill him. Then, I can return to my mother in victory and pride. He alone can match our might. And you think you can kill him? Alvarez mocked and laughed. His smile curved downward into a grimace, and he stomped over and held Gilbert's collar. You should have killed him if you had the chance. Sounds like you've met multiple times. Oh, what? Too busy chasing flowers? I performed my duties. Don't blame me for your misguided predictions and shoddy planning. Gilbert pressed Alvarez against the wall, their eints rising in violent ripples. Enough. Artera raised his voice, not liking to shout, but no other way existed to calm two strong personalities clashing. It is not Gilbert's fault that this Oscar Tur has become our enemy. The only way forward now is to plan for his downfall. Come, we mustn't waste time. And just where are we? Frere asked, tracing her finger along the stone pillar. Artera didn't respond and led them to another chamber, pulling a lever that brightened the entire room. Standing on the edge of the stairway that led down, he gestured for the others to witness the glory, smirking at their gaping faces of awe and wonder. Rows and rows of golems slumbered in their iron armor, thousands ready to hear his call. In the corners of the room stood a titan, 6 in total, all in good condition, unlike the rusted one left behind in fallen heaven. He put power behind his voice that echoed in the great repository of golems and said, "Behold, the legacy of our ancestors, left behind during the Great War. 10,000 warriors of iron and steel and 6 titans, the crux of our golem craft. I knew it. There was no way we would ever rely on the natives of this world to be our army." Alvarez raised his hands and basked in whatever high he was certainly feeling right now. Artera sighed in irritation and listened to more of his little brother's prattlings until one question echoed, "But golems are unreliable. We can decimate continents, but we won't conquer the world with them. Come, there is more." Artera decided it was the right time to reveal the truth. Talos is the central focus on which many lower realms revolve. Too many for the primare of the natives to map, and ideal for many realms to be hidden away. This facility rested in one such realm. The snow realm that held our gifts to you, Gilbert, was another. Our slight control of the realms allowed us to shift it close to your continent and open for your arrival. I never received them. The necklace took me to the snow realm after my continent's war ended. In there, I saw only ruins and a chamber depicting the past. Gilbert looked confused. That man, Oscar, he had Evelyn's necklace, and he is also from the same continent as you. It seems our mistakes of the past still reflect well into our present. But the hands of the clock must keep moving, and our plans must move on. The snow realm held more than just treasure. The people we placed into that realm viewed us as gods, engraved with the pursuit of becoming warriors for our cause, ready to fight when we call upon them. Artera chuckled and waved his hand, the doors opening at his gesture. Light poured through the increasing gap and settled, revealing the bright blue sky. Stepping out on the terrace, Artera said, Oscar has a considerable force of hundreds, if not 1,000 King Exalts under his command. We must even the odds. Cheers erupted, and the ground and air trembled from the thunderous roars. Near the ledge, Artera swept his gaze over the gathered army of tens of thousands. Every Exalt, from the lowest apprentices to the high King Exalts, stomped their feet, chanting to the drummings of war. 2 primaires flew down and floated by his side, bowing their heads in submission. Raising his hand, Artera silenced the grand army, their eyes wide and full of fervor as they waited, breathless and still. Countless millennia ago, from memory to memory, scripture to scripture, you have endured, Artera shouted, and everyone hung on his every word. His training in the oratory arts did not go to waste. Many of you scattered in many realms, waited and dreamed for the moment, training and preparing for our arrival. A single resounding shout rose and ended. Your faith in us has not gone unrewarded. Your ancestors remained steadfast in their beliefs and carried on their will, our will. Look now, the realms have become one. All true believers are here together. And we have returned. The cheers began again. Artera waited for a couple of seconds before one of the primaires coughed, bringing them back to reality. Talos is our birthright. A loud horn sounded, joined by several others in a symphony of war horns. The gates of the fortress opened, and an army of golems marched out, followed by the 6 titans. It had a stimulating effect on the crowd, who stomped their feet and raised their weapons, morale boosted and high. Come now and fight for your gods. Destroy the non-believers. Cleanse Talos and earn your place amongst us, gods in the paradise above. For the gods, for the gods. They chanted, brothers and sisters. Artera turned to them. For our family, for our blood, for the carolan. Gilbert, here. He held out a space pocket. Your mother sacrificed much to obtain this. What is it? Gilbert grabbed the space pocket, his eyes softening. Power. We need a trump against Oscar, and this may grant you the power to kill him. Artera answered. Rid yourself of your failures and kill him. Do it, and you can return to our people with Volton's sword in triumph. I will. Gilbert smiled and clenched the space pocket. Act 4, Fallen Heaven, Chapter 745. Fallen Heaven ends. They got away. Oscar thought, lowering Volton's sword that groaned in remorse. It asked for forgiveness and understanding, sounding like a child caught in trouble. At that last moment before the carolan vanished, he had sensed Volton's sword cutting off its connection and refusing to take in his Ein. Instead, the Ein he had already poured into the sword rebounded and blew up in his body, which might have killed any person if not for his new body forged by matures. He dismissed the rising impulse to rage and shout at the blade inside. I guess you're not meant for me, Oscar murmured to the sword and stowed it away in his dimensional cube. Without Volton's blood that came from the wellspring of Talos, wielding the blade cost too much Ein, and another slash could have killed him. Volton's sword knew that and forcibly halted his attack. Thus, he couldn't place the blame on the sword for trying to protect his life, but at the very least, he had hoped he could kill all the carolan and survive, clinging to the fragment of life in him since that was what his life had become. This place is not bad. Here, at the very top of the dark tower, he took in the sight of the eternal night resting atop a blue horizon, a magnificent sight. Lysander floated at the utmost height, pounding on an invisible hard surface that prevented him from going higher, wearing a face of rage and unwillingness. With Mature's memories, Oscar realized the barrier was set up long ago as a defense mechanism of Talos, preventing anyone with its Ein from leaving and halting anyone from the outside world to enter. Any efforts to break through were futile. The carolan had barely opened a gap for their martial exalts to come through despite their overwhelming strength. He breathed in the thin air and ignored Lysander, turning his attention elsewhere. Below, his followers remained. The stragglers of Gilbert's faction and the Primal Council retreated through the open hatches after the battle had ended. Marcus, Eve, Crag, Restel, Astrid, and Orin met his gaze and knelt, their act sweeping like a cascading tide over the others, who bowed. That was the inevitable result of forcing several grade 9s to retreat. They regarded him with a mix of awe and zeal, the looks of hardened warriors who would gladly give their lives if he asked them for it. And the future demanded he do so. If not them, then perhaps their descendants, bound by their blood oaths to serve him. As he brooded, a warm pair of loving arms wrapped around him, and he felt them trembling weakly. Avril nuzzled his back and gave a muffled groan of concern. He glanced backward at her small head of indigo and asked, "Is something wrong?" "Something is." Avril spun him to face her, staring deep into his eyes. "She wonders how Oscar became so strong. What did you give up for it?" Hearing that, Oscar chuckled, reaching out to caress her head. Just more responsibility. He didn't check for it when she had embraced him, but now he sensed an erratic rhythm in her pulse, faint yet bizarre and out of place. The source of it came from her heart, and without hesitation, he poured in his eyne and forced her asleep, keeping her heart's activity to the bare minimum, quelling the excitement and concern that burned it faster. As her soft body fell limp in his arms, the people around him blinked, some eyes wide in shock. "What are you doing?" A familiar friend rushed in. Her silver hair shimmered behind, riding the winds of her gait, and her emerald eyes glued onto Avril. Celestina stopped a few feet away, followed by other familiar faces, Charles, Philip, and Gavin. "It's been a long time. Almost 100 years." Oscar bowed his head in gratitude. "Thank you for protecting Orin, Ren, and Gloria. I am ashamed to have been useless while you all fought." "You're welcome. My brilliant Drake Empire failed you long ago. It was a long discussion before fallen heaven opened on whether we should fight alongside you or not." Celestina put on a wide grin and held her rapier by her chest in a high salute. "We reached a unanimous decision. The brilliant Drake Empire pledges itself to your cause. As the Empress, I have always sought to wash away our one shame and repay our hero." "Empress, I see. Congratulations." Oscar closed his eyes, recalling the distant memories of the young princess who yearned to be the best ruler for her people and spouted out endless ideas for her reforms during their reading sessions in the library. "I worry for your lands and people. Will they not be vulnerable now?" Celestina grimaced and lowered her gaze in clear shame. "With the great scouring in Talos while we fight in fallen heaven, my empire, our home, will not have the strength to defend itself from the fallen empires seeking revenge. The Primaire of the Bloodlands won't have the capacity to care for his decree and focus on himself." It was natural. The Great Scouring was known to have rearranged entire maps and borders due to the chaos of the sudden loss of all martial exalts. Even the Great Primaires couldn't control every corner of their lands and mainly used this period to consolidate their core regions. It was simply unfortunate timing for the brilliant Drake Empire, as the ownership of the divine essence could have nourished their power and elevated their status as a true contender. But fallen heaven coincided with the worst timing of growth. His Haven Academy was safe because Carcodal placed great importance on it for his sake, but the Far Sky continent was far from the snail's influence. By now, my ancestors should have uprooted the bulk of our people and migrated them over under the snail Primaire's protection. Celestina sighed heavily, scratching her head. The stress of her home's fate and pretending to serve Gilbert's interests would wear anyone out. Little wonder her hair was unkempt and her eyes dragged by dark bags. "You're welcome to stay with the old pavilion master in Haven Academy. There is always room for my friends." Oscar smiled and nodded to Charles, Gavin, and Philip. The disc under their feet quaked as Lysander shot down and landed, wearing a scowl. "Damned prison. Just let me leave." His yellow eyes locked on Oscar, and he marched forward, grinning as if he had seen hope. "Hey, Oscar. Bust open this prison for me. Only a gap for a single second will be enough." I do not have that authority. Talos imprisoned itself for a reason. Oscar didn't bother to explain the loss of Vine that might occur if people kept leaving. Damn! Lysander shouted. What will you do now? Oscar extended out his hand. Thank you for protecting everyone. You're one honorable man. Will you join us? I'm not an honorable man. I do what I want. Lysander bellowed in great laughter and shook his hand. I reject. I want no part in this war between you two. I'll search for my own way out of Talos and explore the stars until I die in a glorious flash that makes me one of them. He leaped off the edge, still floating as he gave one final show of goodwill. Good luck on your war. With that, he vanished past one of the hatches, his laughter still echoing from it. He felt like a host of a banquet going around to greet the guests, certainly the most dignified ones, such as a princess and a scion of an entire half of the word. Next on his list was the carolan woman who helped him earlier, Charisse. Many of the people below and those nearby tensed up and focused on her as he approached, his feet slow and careful, still wary of any ploys. She glanced at Avril and then at him, her expression indecipherable. In a way, if Lord Isaac had lived on and had you as his disciple, I reckon he and Aunt Evelyn might have arranged a marriage between us. Charisse clapped her hands together and laughed. That was a joke, a joke. I have no intention of ruining what you already have. So, any questions, heir of Isaac and Volten? Why did you betray them? Oscar asked. Revenge, Charisse stated with a cold gleam in her icy pair of eyes, a far cry from the mischievous glint that permeated them before. I have a reason to kill them, and you want to save this world. She assumed her usual playfulness and giggled. And you are Uncle Isaac's heir. Naturally, I have to side with you. For now, you have stopped them from achieving a victory here, but they will return. They can't hope to match everyone here, right? In the end, they'll be outnumbered and outmatched. I already know several Trigem primaires who won't side with them. He included Carrick, the primaire who acted against Isaac in the past. Though the one-eyed man was an enemy, Oscar could rely on his hatred of both ancients and carolan. That arrogant Artera believes I have no clue, but they have a great force in hiding, Charisse explained further. The carolan hid and seeded many smaller realms with their loyal followers and created doctrines of faith and religion to bind them to be loyal servants, an army that endured for however long they required to return. Perhaps even primaires existed amongst them. Oscar's ears perked up at the mention of a golem refinery that produced warriors of iron. Knowing Artera, he will take a while to draw up plans, but his focus will be to hold on to lands in Talos and build his influence. An army of zealous fighters and scores of golems at their command. How will you fight them? Seems like a fair battle. Was it fate or destiny driving this battle? It all seemed far too coincidental that he had the same groups under his thrall. He already had an army of die-hard loyal warriors and the means to produce his own golems, weapons, and airships of terrifying potency. Like Ignire's always said, fight fire with a bigger fire. Suddenly, light burst under his feet and engulfed him, the onset of the teleportation out of fallen heaven. If you truly want to gain my trust, then meet me on the lunate continent. I'll meet you there later. There are a few things I must do first. Charisse waved him off. Don't look at me like that. It's rude to stare at a lady. I have no foul intent. The light shot up and flashed, leaving no trace of her. Next was his turn. The light blinded him as a sting spread across his skin. He blinked several times, regaining his sight. The room was familiar. One table stood to his right, grouped with 4 chairs. The wooden floor underneath sounded firm and hard as he knocked on it with his knees and feet, rising to stand. It was his home in Haven Academy. In his arms, Avril groaned and rustled in his arms. Oscar, how dare you put me to sleep? Avril woke up and pulled on his ear, blushing in his chest. Her breathing grew ragged as her face visibly paled, wiping away her red flush. I'm all right. Don't be angry, Oscar hugged her tighter. Please. I'm not mad, Avril pouted and stoked his cheek, smiling with a pair of dazzling gold pupils. Welcome home. Yeah. His voice cracked as tears welled in his eyes. I'm home, but I'm sorry. We might have to move again. She's gotten used to it. Who cares if we move again? Avril wrapped her arms around his neck and drew him close, kissing him softly. Giving a cheerful smile that exposed her dimples, she asked, "Where next?" "First, I want to rest with you." Oscar carried her inside their room and lay her on the bed. He joined her and placed a blanket to cover them. First? Then what's second? Avril tilted her head in confusion. "I have to get an old friend back." The time was perfect, unlike in the past. She seemed to want to know more, but he covered her eyes and told her to sleep. Oscar rested her head on his arm and placed his hand on her back, keeping her close. Soon, her faint snores landed softly on his chest. He chuckled and rested his chin on her hair, pondering the future. Fallen heaven was over, and the age of kings would begin. But for now, he wished to rest with his wife and sleep away the long years they endured. Blissful rest claimed him, and he saw no more nightmares, only a good dream of a faraway land, fields of golden grain, and him walking on a stone path toward home.